Chapter 2 of your textbook discusses diversity in children's literature. Children's literature and cultural and social diversity, equity, and inclusion are all discussed in this chapter. And it is helping us to understand how children's literature can be used to embrace diversity. Cultural and social diversity and inclusion in picture books, they can be used to embrace and celebrate aspects of differentness, such as culture, race, ethnicity, religion, gender, sexual orientation, identity, and physical and mental abilities. Children's literature can be a powerful tool in celebrating diversity and educating children. They can be used to broaden young minds to embrace humanity and help them to appreciate people regardless of their diversity. Before we begin looking at the different types of diversity, we're going to discuss some important terms. So we're going to define diversity, inclusion, and equity. Diversity is the recognition and celebration of individuals' differences, both culturally and socially. I think we tend to focus on cultural diversity, but social diversity is also very important to be reflected in children's books, and we'll look at some examples of those books. Inclusion is the bringing together of people with varied cultural backgrounds to build a stronger and more vibrant society. When we hear the terms equity versus equality, some people think that they're the same thing. However, they're a little bit different. Equality means each individual of group or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities, whereas equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact same resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. To help you better understand that, this visual explains it well. In the first picture on the top left, you see an example of equality. They all have the same step to oversee the fence. However, you can see the one on the end cannot see the game. The next slide shows equity. Now they all have what they need to be able to see the game, even though their needs are a little bit different. Liberation is getting rid of that fence, and they can all see the game. And inclusion, now they're uniform, the fence is gone, and they can all see the game. So why are books on diversity important? Culturally diverse literature provides benefits for everyone. It provides the minority culture with positive role model and increases cultural pride and individual dignity. Children's books provide wisdom, and they're filled with ideas that can shape their thinking and alter lives. They can help recreate society and impact the world positively. That is from Russell on page 25, that's your textbook. They can foster difficult discussions about controversial topics. And it's important to remember that 1 in 7 U.S. citizens are from another country. Arizona has the most people of blended heritage, ethnicities, and races than any other U.S. state. Hispanics are currently the largest minority in the U.S. Demographers predict that by 2015 there will be no racial majority in the U.S., and Caucasians will comprise 49% of the population. Some states, Arizona and California, already no longer have racial majorities. So let's focus now on cultural diversity, or what we call multiculturalism. This refers to people of differing racial, ethnic, cultural, and religious backgrounds. Believe it or not, heroes from minority groups did not begin to appear until the social movement of the 1960s, but it was still rare. It is extremely important that children's reading is reflective of cultural diversity. This was a study done on children's books in 2015. When you think about the protagonists in the books, how are they represented? Unbelievably, 73.3% of the protagonists were white. 12.5% were animals, trucks, etc. 7.6% African Americans, 3.3% Asian Pacific Americans, 2.4% Latinos, and 0.9% American Indians. A great deal of attention was given to this, and it influenced authors to try to represent cultural diversity more. So another study was done in 2018, and they made a great deal of progress. So the characters in the book, or the protagonists, it went from 73.3% white to 50% white. The biggest increase was in the category of animals, trucks, other type of protagonists. That went from 12.5% to 27%. And there was a slight increase in the other cultural literature. The latest study in 2020 found more progress. Only 41% of the protagonists and characters were white. And once again, there was an increase in the animal, trucks category of characters. But in the other cultural backgrounds, there was also a significant increase. So we are on the right track. These statistics also make us consider who is writing these books. There is some argument as to who is the best person to write the culturally diverse books. Some argue that it should only be written by a member of that cultural group. The textbook explains that argument, and it talks about how Henry Louis Gates disagrees. And his quote was, "No human culture is so inaccessible to someone who makes an effort to understand it, learn, and inhabit another world." So you can see that 71% of the books were created by at least one white creator. And by the creator, we mean either the author, the illustrator, or the compiler. So 71%. And then you can see the other categories of who is creating these books. So that is also something to consider. So now let's break it down by some of the ethnic groups. The American Indian, for a long time, children's picture books either ignored the American Indian or relied on stereotypes, such as the beaded feathered warrior in animal skins and moccasins. Two important genres of American Indian literature are historical fiction and nonfiction. An example of a book in this category would be The Absolutely True Story of a Part-Time Indian by Sherman Alexie. Many people took this book in different ways. Sherman Alexie grew up on the Indian reservation, and he uses a bit of a humorous outlook to talk about what life was like growing up on the reservation. It's a very accurate portrayal. His goal in writing it was not to sugarcoat it. He really addressed the struggles of growing up on the reservation. And his goal was to educate people about what it's like to hopefully bring improvement. This book won the National Book Award. It's also on top of the most banned book list. It's a great read. I would recommend, if you haven't read it, to read it. If we trace back how African Americans were portrayed in children's literature, the earliest significant body of literature came in form of poetry by Langston Hughes in the 1920s during the Harlem Renaissance. The first children's picture book that featured an African American protagonist was The Snowy Day, written in 1962 by Jewish author and illustrator and storyteller Ezra Jack Keats. The trend in today's book portraying African Americans is to emphasize distinct traits rather than becoming part of the melting pot. Examples of books in this category are Christopher Paul's Curtis's Bud, not Buddy. Next comes a category of American Hispanics and Latinos or Latinas. So the difference is Hispanic American refers to those whose heritage comes from the Spanish-speaking nations south of the U.S. border, whereas Latino is a broader term for Portuguese-speaking Brazilian heritage. Latinos make up the largest minority group, yet are greatly underrepresented in children's books. Many times they get unfair and negative stereotypes in literature portrayed as criminals, aliens, the helpless victim, machismo, and so on. There are starting to be more quality books for young readers that represent the Latino heritage, such as Baseball in April and Esperanza Rising. Asian Americans, early books written on Asian Americans stereotype them as speaking English poorly, being reluctant and docile, and the illustrations portrayed them as all looking alike. An excellent way to introduce children to the Asian culture is through myths and legends such as Ali Ling's Liu Ye Shen. Great book. Writers today are doing a much better job portraying the Asian culture, such as Alan Say's beautifully illustrated book, Grandpa's Journey, which tells the story of a Japanese-American immigrant, and it's a good example of culturally sensitive narratives. The next category of diversity is social diversity. This refers to people within society who traditionally have been left out or considered subpar. These diversities, and remember diversity means differentness, can include gender, disabilities, economic background, social orientation, physical deformity, etc. Some examples of quality books that deal with a social diversity theme is the novel Wonder, which is about a boy that has a facial deformation. That's written by R.J. Palacio. And she just wrote another book based on that, and that's called The Julian Book. Excellent book. If you like the book Wonder, be sure to read that. Another book on sexual orientation is Boy Meets Boy. We are reading The Serpent King in class. This book deals with social diversity of poverty, domestic abuse, grief, religious fundamentalism, and imprisoned parents. And another book that deals with people in wheelchairs is Killing the Kudu. Social diversity can lead to bullying in schools, and hopefully these books can promote understanding and compassion. So one thing to consider with children's books that have topics that may be sensitive with social diversity, such as sexual orientation. There is a big debate now. Do those belong in our school libraries? And librarians are really struggling with that. The book fairs are trying to have socially diverse literature, and they're certain parent groups are opposing that. So the important thing to consider is that no one is suggesting that teachers or librarians should be forced to have them in their library collection. These type of books dealing with sensitive topics were more written for at-home use to use with your children. So this is a great debate. They're important. They do create humanity, understanding. That might be a good topic for you. At the end, we're going to have issues with children's literature, controversies and issues, and you're going to pick a topic. And if this topic interests you, I would strongly recommend you choose this topic, because right now it is a current issue and trend that librarians, teachers, school officials are all trying to do with the correct thing that pleases everybody and makes it so that we have those books available. You have an assignment this week where you're going to have to choose a culturally or socially diverse children's books, and you're going to have to evaluate it. There are things that these culturally and